what's the story of Russia post World War One, and why is Stalin this face of evil as he's projected in mainstream media now?
Um, so World War One, the Tsar loses control because he's so fantastically incompetent. He refuses to trust people. His wife trusts a guy. First, he trusts his wife, who's equally incompetent. Uh, the wife trusts a guy called Rasputin,
Hmm.
who basically controls her because he's able to control the crown prince's hemophilia. And what ends up happening is the Russian front just keeps collapsing, 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 collapsing. Uh, they come up with some ideas, badly executed, the Brusilov offensive and things like that, fails, just keeps collapsing. Uh, Civil order breaks down in Russia. They can tolerate no more. And the Tsar isn't brutal enough. You remember how we discussed Idi Amin didn't have the ability to control his people because he wasn't industrial? Same thing, Tsar can't control his people. Revolution breaks out. He's replaced. The Tsar abdicates. He abdicates for himself and his son. So he ends the Romanov dynasty himself. And first, the Mensheviks take over. Now, they try to be quite democratic. They want to fight the war, see it through to its end. But then the Bolsheviks, who are the Lenin faction, take over. There's a nasty civil war that kills millions of people. Both sides are very, very nasty in this. The Tsarist side is also extremely nasty. There was this genuine freak show called Baron uh, Ungarn Sternberg, Ungarn something, I forget. Quasi Hindu Buddhist Russian imperialist who wants to create a Mongol Khanate. So he operates in the parts of Russia adjacent to Mongolia, and he wants to revive the sort of Russian monarchy in the image of Genghis Khan. Does a lot of shit that Genghis Khan does as well, but ultimately loses because people don't want to talk about this. The communists were much more brutal. They were willing to do things that even the worst royalist generals were not willing to do. Ultimately, they win by the mid 20s. Stalin dies. Lenin dies. Lenin didn't die aise vaise. He was actually shot in the head. There was a bullet lodged in his head, which in his last months made him madder and madder and madder. This is actually demonstrated because they couldn't get the bullet out. The poisoning started in the head. He becomes progressively much more erratic in his last few months, and finally he dies because of the bullet, ultimately proximate cause. And Stalin by this time has accumulated all the bureaucratic power, and he takes it to the next level. And his way of controlling the party, because communist parties are very hierarchical, there are people with their own roles and things. The moment you show any level of promise of popularity, you're accused of being a spy and killed off. So there was nothing in 400 years of Romanov history or 300 years of Romanov history that was even remotely as bad as Lenin and Stalin combined. Right? Horrible characters. Whole community is wiped out, dude. Uh, but it's you don't really talk about it. Um, and what ends up happening is he terrorizes everybody so much you don't know for what you're going to end up in Siberia or shot. There are personal signed lists of his for at least 1 million people killed, executed,
Why Siberia?
because it's a horrible place to be. If you go to certain parts of Siberia, there's the area called Yakutia, which acts as a funnel for Arctic winds. And it's actually colder there than it is in the Arctic at any given point of time.
Wow.
The coldest place on Earth is a place called Oymyakon, which is there. It's on average minus 60 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
Yeah. And imagine working and living out there. It's literally hell freezes over. It's hell freezes over.
Hmm.
Uh, and he's forcing you to work in these conditions, no respect for human life. Millions of people just dying from overwork, being underfed, undernourished, underclothed through exposure, whatever. He doesn't give a damn about human lives. Remember, Russia lost its will to fight in the First World War for far, far 1/10 the number of deaths that it endured in the Second World War. But in the Second World War, Stalin's stupidity plus brutality leads to 26 million deaths. 26 million, but the people are more scared of Stalin than they are of Hitler.
Yeah, there's a movie called Last Sniper or something.
Yeah.
Uh,
Jude Law, right?
yeah.
In Stalingrad.
Yeah, but basically they've kind of tried explaining how the Russian war tactic during World War II was to just throw maximal soldiers into the war.
Yes.
So the moment the first bunch of soldiers die, they actually pick up civilians and throw them into the war. Give them weapons.
You know, initially, the Soviet army had one rifle per two people. So if Ranveer and Abhijit are the team, I will rush ahead with my rifle. You don't have a rifle. You're hiding behind me. I get shot, then you pick up my rifle and charge. They also had penal brigades, which is people from jails were taken out, and wherever there was a minefield, they'll be made to charge first so that they all die, and then the troops go in. They were horrible. I mean, imagine. But now let me spin this the positive way. This is why I say there's no black and white. For somebody as murderous as Hitler, a weakling like the Tsar would have collapsed like that. The reason Russia won was precisely because it had somebody brutal like Stalin, who first brutalized society and forcibly industrialized it, and then was absolutely unflinching in the number of people he was willing to sacrifice to win. The USSR would not have won that war had it not been for Stalin. Let's be very, very clear about this, right? Ultimately, the hero is the average Soviet citizen, the average Ukrainian, the average Belarusian, the average Russian, the average Kazakh, in fact, or Uzbek or Turkmen or whatever. But it needs a leader. So you tell me on balance, did Stalin destroy Russia or did he make Russia? It's a very difficult question to answer. Had Hitler taken over because he considered the Slavs to be subhuman, he would have killed all of them. In fact, his instructions to his army was to kill as many. He had more respect for French lives, Austrian lives, of course, because they're Germans, than he did for Russians. For him, Russians were subhuman to all be killed. They would have been killed irrespective had it not been for Stalin. So again, shades of grey. How do you describe Stalin then?
We were talking about Stalin?
Stalin, yeah.
Can you draw out his life post World War II?
So he didn't live for very long after World War II, right? Like World War II ends in 45, and by 52 he's dead. And his bloodlust never let up because he realized the only way of controlling was through sheer terror. And for him, the more industrialized and technology you had, the better his ability to control. So it was always finding enemies where none existed, where you didn't know what you had to do to be declared an enemy. You could be the most loyal fan of Stalin, but one fine day you'd be accused of treason and you'd get carted off.
Why?
Because at that point, everybody's shit scared. They're too scared to think of any plot to replace him, and you just can't replace him.
Have you been to Russia?
Yeah, several times.
How do they look back at Stalin?
Right now, a very mixed take. And the Russians are much more nuanced than a lot of other people. They're such a morose race. They take a great deal of pleasure in suffering. I've never seen. I mean, have you read Turgenev and Dostoevsky and all of that? It's so
melancholic,
bleak, and death and dying and misery. I don't think I've come across a country more dedicated to mental BDSM than the Russians.
Mental BDSM.
Yeah, it's like
talking about all this self-suffering, suffering within history.
It's like they love suffering, right? I don't know why. It's in their national character, I guess. Um, but for them, Stalin is such a mixed character because of that. They recognize that some good came of it. I mean, there's not a single Russian who will tell you they could have won the war without Stalin being in charge of it.
Hmm.
At the same time, they also recognize he was an absolutely horrible human being who caused a lot of long term harm to Russia. Uh, there wasn't a single member, there isn't a single Russian family who didn't lose a family member during Stalin's purges. Not one. Not one family. Maybe somewhere some yak herders in extreme Siberia who were untouched. But other than that, nobody.
Have you been to Siberia?
Yeah.
What's the vibe?
Bleak, freezing. I've not been to Oymyakon yet, but I've been to the southern tip of that Yakut gap. It's called Yakutsk. And it goes down. When I was there, it was something like minus 37 or something.
Wow.
Yeah.
What does minus 37 feel like?
So, it's very strange. If once you're well wrapped up, the minuses don't matter anymore. It's only the part of you that's exposed, the eyes and the face that feel the cold. And there you have to wear goggles because, the moisture in your eyes will freeze and you'll get frostbite in your eyes. And you wear a mask much before COVID and all that started because your breath warms up the rest of your face. And how there were herders out there, the original Yakut people who have been nomadic cattle herders for the longest time. You never understand how people manage to live in that, but they do. But yeah, it's exciting. I've never been to Oymyakon. I want to go to Oymyakon.
But is the energy of the land sad?
It's unforgiving.
Brutal.
It's brutal. And I think that adds a lot to the Russian character. That, you have no natural defenses other than the cold. And so you've got to be extremely brutal to survive out there.
Bane's dialogue from Batman, I was born in the dark.
Like
that's how I look at
basically.
Russians.
Yeah.
They're born in such a brutal land.
But it also leads to great beauty. A Russian can outdrink you. He or she can have a lot more fun than you can. They have a great tradition of music and literature, great architecture. But for all that greatness, there's also a very deep, dark side to it.
In almost all the people's minds.
Not necessarily. There's these soft urban Russians now since the 60s when life wasn't so brutal anymore and the Stalinist repression had ended. But you do get hints of it. Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty sure Putin has studied all these people in and out.
I'm sure he has.
But do you think that's the case with every world leader? Do you think even Modi's cabinet, Trump's cabinet, everyone is constantly studying recent world history? No?
Yeah.
But won't there be lessons to be learned?
There should be lessons to be learned. But I don't think Modi's cabinet studies anything outside of India, realistically, except in terms of finance or whatever. And in terms of the Trump cabinet, I think they have a very good hold on history, even though they are mocked and laughed at. I think they've picked out the distilled essence of history much better. There's this academic derision of people who are not validated by academia. What do you actually know? I know so much more than you because I've written 20 academic papers, peer-reviewed journal papers. And this is the classic, it's the emperor has no clothes. It took the stupid little boy to call out the emperor's stupidity when all the scholars in court were pretending that the emperor had clothes. Sometimes you don't need that much. And this is again that Salazar versus the failed economics professor versus the semi-literate general who did economics much better than the economics professor. Right? It's like that.
Perhaps what you truly need in order to stay in power for a very long time is brutality along with street smarts.
There's no one way. And see, this is the thing. This is how the left captures you. They want you to think that there is a template. There is one way of doing things. There is none. There's 100 different ways you can become a dictator. There's 100 different things you can do once you become a dictator. So Lee Kuan Yew was horrible in the initial stages, but after that, he used violence very sparingly. Once he consolidated power, he did not have you killed. He used to bankrupt you. So the Singapore parliament is the only parliament where you can be sued for what you say in parliament. And because of that, he would go after his enemies and he would bankrupt them financially. They'd have nothing else to do. I think that's a fairly civilized way to go about it, right?
How
So-
do you bankrupt someone?
You sue them for defamation.
Okay.